In the 106-degree Texas heat, I was trudging along the melting asphalt with heavy grocery bags and screaming toddler. Suddenly, my own SUV zoomed past me. My mother-in-law was at the wheel, and my sister-in-law was in the passenger seat. They just offered a mocking wave and kept driving, leaving us to bake in the sun. They had no idea that in 1 hour, I'd be throwing them out of the house they don't even own. The heat in Austin was a physical weight, a staggering 106 degrees that turned the air into a shimmering haze. My sandals were practically fusing with the bubbling asphalt. 3 heavy grocery bags were white-knuckling my forearms, and my 2-year-old, Leo, was a screaming, sweaty weight clinging to my hip. Sweat stung my eyes, but I didn't blink. I couldn't afford to. I was too busy watching my own silver SUV cruise effortlessly past me. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, was at the wheel. My sister-in-law, Sloane, sat in the passenger seat. They didn't stop. They didn't even tap the brakes. They just offered a casual, mocking wave and kept driving my car, leaving me to founder in the brutal Texas sun. I managed to stumble another block before my legs simply gave out. I collapsed onto the curb, the heat radiating through my jeans as I tried to shield Leo from the glare with my own body. My phone had died minutes ago. My water bottle was a hollow plastic shell. At 29 years old, I was sitting in the dirt like a piece of discarded litter. Then, a shadow stretched over us. It wasn't a passing cloud. It was a lifted black heavy-duty truck idling at the curb. The window slid down to reveal my father, Thomas. He didn't look like a guardian angel. He looked like a localized thunderstorm. Thomas was a master contractor who had built half the custom estates in this hill country, a man who lived by blueprints, steel, and non-negotiable deadlines. He didn't ask why I was on foot. He didn't ask where my husband was. He simply shifted the truck into park, stepped out, and wordlessly lifted Leo from my trembling arms. "Get in," he said. His voice was low, vibrating with the specific frequency he used right before someone was fired from a job site. I climbed into the passenger seat, my fingers shaking as I buckled Leo into his seat. "Dad, it's fine," I lied, my throat feeling like it was lined with sandpaper. I wanted the work." He didn't look at me. He stared straight through the windshield, his knuckles white against the leather-wrapped steering wheel. "Don't lie to me, Nora. I saw them pass you. I saw Beatrice driving your car." He pulled back onto the road, the tires gripping the pavement with aggressive precision. "We're going to the house. Do not speak. Just watch." The drive to the gated community usually took 10 minutes. Thomas did it in 6. We pulled up to the property, a sprawling limestone villa with a lawn so manicured it looked painted. It was my husband Julian's obsession. And there, parked squarely in the center of the circular driveway, was my silver SUV. The liftgate was open. Beatrice and Sloane were busy unloading shopping bags, laughing as they draped designer garment bags over their arms. Dad didn't park on the street. He angled the truck directly across the mouth of the driveway, boxing them in completely. He cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, like the static charge in the air before a lightning strike. We stepped out. Beatrice looked up, shielding her eyes. She didn't look remorseful. She looked inconvenienced. "Thomas," she called out, smoothing the front of her silk blouse. "You're blocking the way. Sloane has to leave for a gallery opening in an hour." "She isn't going anywhere," my father said, walking up the drive with a measured, predatory gait. "Give me the keys." Beatrice let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Excuse me? We're borrowing it." Nora doesn't need a luxury vehicle just to go to the park and handle diapers. Sloane is a professional. She's building a career. Image is everything in her world. There it was. The distorted logic that had governed my life for the past 3 years. My existence was purely functional, while Sloane's was aspirational. Therefore, my property belonged to her by right of ambition. The front door swung open and Julian stepped out. He was wearing a crisp polo, looking annoyed by the commotion. He saw me, red-faced, dusty, and standing in the shadow of my father. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't reach for his son. He looked at the truck blocking his driveway and scowled. "Thomas, seriously?" Julian hissed, stepping closer. "Keep your voice down. The HOA is incredibly strict about noise and commercial vehicles. You're going to get us a violation notice." He was worried about a $50 fine. I had been on the verge of heat stroke. My father didn't even acknowledge Julian's existence. He kept his eyes locked on Beatrice and held out a palm. "The keys. Now. Or I take them." Beatrice scoffed, clutching her designer handbag to her chest. "You're being hysterical. We're family. We share things." Dad stepped into her personal space. He was 6'2" of weathered muscle and resolve. "I am not asking a second time." Beatrice froze. The practiced smile vanished. She reached into her purse, pulled out the key fob, and slammed it into his hand. "Fine, take it. But you've always been so aggressive. It's no wonder Nora is so tightly wound." Dad tossed the keys to me without looking back. "Get in your car, Nora. We're leaving." "You can't just take her," Julian shouted, finally finding his voice now that his mother was upset. "She has responsibilities here. Dinner isn't even started." Dad stopped. He turned to look at Julian, eyeing him the way an inspector looks at a load-bearing wall that's about to collapse. "You'd better figure out how to work the stove, Julian, because she's done cooking for you." I buckled Leo into the SUV. The leather was cool. The climate control kicked in instantly. I watched in the rearview mirror as it climbed back into his truck. Julian was still standing in the driveway, arguing with the empty air, while Beatrice comforted a pouting Sloane. They looked so small in the mirror. So insignificant. I shifted into reverse. I didn't know it yet, but I would never spend another night under that roof. "You'd better figure out how to use a stove, Julian, because she's done cooking for you." I buckled Leo into my SUV. The leather was cool against my skin, the air conditioning an instant mercy. I watched in the rearview mirror as it climbed back into his truck. Julian was still standing in the driveway, shouting at the empty air, while Beatrice hovered over Sloane, who was pouting about her lost ride. They looked so small in the mirror. So utterly petty. I shifted into reverse. I didn't know it yet, but I would never sleep in that house again. We drove to Dad's office in a heavy, ringing silence. The only sound was the hum of the vents and Leo's soft, rhythmic breathing from the back seat. When we walked into the conference room, the air felt thick, like the sudden drop in pressure before a tornado touches down. Dad poured me a glass of water. His hands were steady, but his eyes were dark with a quiet fury. "Talk to me, Nora. Since when does Beatrice drive your car while you walk? Since when does Julian let his mother treat you like hired help?" I stared at the water, watching a single bead of condensation trek down the side of the glass. "Since always," I whispered. But it got worse when he started paying the rent. Dad's brow furrowed. Rent? Julian told me he was buying that place. He tells everyone that, I said, a bitter, jagged laugh escaping my throat. But he tells me he pays $3,500 a month to a property management firm called Azure Vista Properties. He holds it over my head every single day. He says since he provides the roof, he makes the rules. He says that because I'm just a freelancer and a mother, my contribution is maintenance. Keeping his mother happy. Giving up my car. Making myself small so he can feel big. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't fear anymore, it was pure adrenaline. Julian loves being the provider, I continued, the screen glowing to life. He loves the ritual of signing that check. It makes him feel powerful. It makes him feel like he owns me. And you let him, Dad said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a profound question. Why? That was the hardest part to admit, even to myself. Because I was trained to, I said, looking my father in the eye. Beatrice pulled me aside the day we got married. She told me that strong women end up alone. She said, a good wife is a mirror, Nora. Your job is to reflect him at twice his size. They convinced me that diminishing myself was a form of love. That letting Sloane take my things and letting Beatrice criticize my parenting was just the price I had to pay for a family. I thought I was being supportive. I didn't realize I was being erased. Dad looked like he wanted to put his fist through the mahogany table, but he stayed seated. So, he pays this Azure Vista company. Who are they? Some investment group? I turned the laptop around so he could see the portal. Read the owner's name, Dad. He leaned in, squinting at the screen. Then he froze. He looked at the text, then at me, then back at the screen again. You, he breathed. It's you. I am Azure Vista Properties, I said, the words tasting like cold iron. Grandma left me the inheritance 3 years ago. I bought the house in cash. I put it in an LLC because I knew about Beatrice's history with debt. I knew if she found out I had money, she'd guilt Julian into draining me dry. So, I hid it. I made myself the landlord. Does he know? No. He thinks he's paying a faceless corporation. Every month, he writes a check for $3,500. He throws it on the counter and tells me to make sure it gets mailed. And every month, I deposit it into a high-yield savings account for Leo. Dad sat back, a slow, terrifying grin spreading across his face. You own the house. You own the very roof they're sleeping under. I do. And they just tried to lock me out of it. I looked at the digital ledger on the screen. 3 years of payments. 3 years of Julian puffing his chest out, bragging about providing for his family while unknowingly paying rent to the wife he treated like a servant. He thinks he has the power because he writes the check, I said, closing the laptop with a definitive click. He forgot to check who cashes it. Dad stood up, his voice hardening with resolve. You have the keys. Well then, Madam Landlord, I think it's time for an inspection. My phone began to vibrate violently against the table. It wasn't a call, it was a siege. Text messages from Julian were stacking up on the lock screen, each one more unhinged than the last. Where the hell are you? Mom is crying. She missed her appointment. You are being incredibly selfish. Sloane is having a panic attack. I didn't touch the phone. I just watched the notifications slide in like evidence for a trial. Then came the voicemail. I put it on speaker. Nora. Julian's voice was tight with that specific, patronizing tone he used when he wanted to sound authoritative. You've made your point. You embarrassed my mother and you ruined Sloane's afternoon. I hope you're happy. But if you aren't back here in 30 minutes with the car, don't bother coming back at all. I'm calling a locksmith. We're changing the locks. You're done here. The line went dead. The silence in the room was absolute. He's going to change the locks on my house, I said, the sheer absurdity of it settling in my chest. He's going to lock me out of the property I bought with my own money. Check the accounts, Dad said. His voice had lost its edge of anger, replaced by the cold, flat tone of a man conducting an audit. If they think they own your car and your home, I guarantee they think they own your money, too. A prickle of dread crawled down my spine. I opened a new tab and logged into the joint checking account, the one we used for groceries and utilities. I kept just enough in there to maintain the illusion that I was a struggling freelancer living on an allowance. I stared at the balance. $412, I whispered. It's gone. There was over $3,000 in here yesterday. I clicked the transaction history. A full transfer had been made an hour ago to an account belonging to Beatrice Vance. She had seen the confrontation in the driveway, realized the status quo was collapsing, and grabbed the lifeboats. Dig deeper, Dad commanded. My fingers were trembling as I opened my email. I searched for alerts, for credit hits, for anything. I found a notification from a monitoring service I'd signed up for years ago and forgotten. It was dated 3 days ago. New account opened. Platinum Premier signature. Credit limit, $75,000. Current balance, $65,400. I verified my identity with shaking hands. When the statement loaded, the room seemed to tilt on its axis. Dad, I choked out. He came around the table to look at the screen. The card had been opened in my name, using my social security number and my pristine credit history. But the billing address was listed as Sloane Vance's apartment. And there was only one transaction. Ever After Bridal Atelier, $65,400. Sloane's wedding dress, I said, my voice sounding hollow, as if it were coming from someone else. And the venue deposit. They put her entire wedding on my credit. They didn't just borrow your credit, Nora, Dad corrected, his finger hovering over the screen. They stole your identity. Beatrice didn't just take the car. She used your life as a line of credit to fund her daughter's vanity. That isn't a family dispute. That is a felony. I stared at the numbers. $65,000. They had looked at me, the woman who cooked their Sunday roasts, who scrubbed their floors, who walked through the Texas heat with their grandchild, and decided I was nothing more than a resource to be harvested. They didn't want to love me. They wanted to consume me. The tears dried up instantly. The fear evaporated, replaced by something cold and sharp that clicked into place behind my ribs. It was the feeling of a steel trap snapping shut. He wants to change the locks, I said, looking up at my father. That's what he said on the message. I reached for my phone, but I didn't call Julian. I didn't text him back. Let's go, I said, standing up. I need to stop by the precinct first. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The person who had collapsed on the curb an hour ago was gone. In her place was someone much more useful. Dad, I said, my voice steady. Call the locksmith. Tell him we need a full rekey at 8:00 for Pinnacle Drive tonight. Dad didn't ask questions. He just pulled out his phone. I opened my laptop one last time. I didn't log into social media or my personal mail. I accessed the secure server for Azure Vista Properties. I pulled up the lease agreement Julian had signed 3 years ago, the one he'd bragged about negotiating so shrewdly. I scrolled past the pet deposits and HOA addendums until I found it. Section 24, Paragraph B, Immediate Termination of Tenancy. The landlord reserves the right to terminate this agreement effective immediately if the tenant, or any guest of the tenant, engages in criminal activity on the premises or utilizes the premises to facilitate a felony. Identity theft. Credit card fraud. Grand theft auto. They hadn't just broken my heart, they had broken the lease. I opened a new document and typed the header, Notice of Immediate Lease Termination. I filled in the details, citing the police report number I was about to file for the fraud. I didn't sign it as Nora. I signed it, N. Sterling, Managing Member, Azure Vista Properties. The sound of the office printer whirring to life was the most satisfying thing I had heard in years. Ready? Dad asked, pocketing his phone. Ready. The sound of the printer whirring to life was the most satisfying thing I had heard in years. Ready? Dad asked, hanging up the phone. Ready. We drove back to the house. My house. The lights were ablaze, casting a warm, deceptive glow over the limestone facade. Through the expansive front window, I could see Beatrice lounging on my sofa with a glass of Cabernet. Sloane was scrolling through her phone, laughing, while Julian paced the length of the hardwood floors with the air of a man who owned the world. They had threatened to lock me out. Now they were celebrating in the living room I had paid for in full. Dad killed the engine and handed me the folder. Want me to knock? He asked. No, I said, pulling the master key from my pocket. Landlords don't knock when there's a crime in progress. I unlocked the door and stepped inside without hesitation. The room went silent. Beatrice jumped, her hand jerking so hard the red wine splashed across the white Moroccan rug. What the hell are you doing? Julian shouted, rounding on me. How did you get in here? I said nothing. I simply walked to the coffee table and laid the eviction notice on the glass. You're being evicted, I said. Effective immediately. Julian let out a sharp, mocking bark of a laugh. He reached down and snatched up the paper, but as his eyes found the signature at the bottom, the laughter died in his throat. I am Azure Vista Properties, I said, placing the original deed beside the notice. I bought this house 3 years ago. Every rent check you ever signed came directly to me. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of grey. Beatrice tried to launch into a protest, her voice rising in a shrill, desperate arc, until I laid out the preliminary police report. You stole my identity, Beatrice. $65,000 on a fraudulent line of credit. The police are already on their way. Panic took her then. It was a grotesque performance. She grabbed a ceramic vase from the side table and smashed it against the floor, then began tearing at her own silk blouse and scratching her arms until they bled. She fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, screaming into the receiver that I was attacking her, that she feared for her life. Dad didn't move. He simply pointed to the small, blinking blue light nestled in the crown molding. High-definition cameras, Beatrice. Audio and video. You're live-streaming your own felony. When the officers arrived 10 minutes later, they didn't need to hear our side of the story. They just watched the footage. 5 minutes after that, Beatrice was led out in handcuffs, her screams echoing down the quiet suburban street. Julian was removed shortly after for trespassing. He tried to look at me, to find some shred of the woman who had spent 3 years making herself small for him, but I didn't give him the satisfaction. The locksmith arrived at midnight. The house went quiet, not the tense, suffocating silence of the last few years, but a genuine, hollow peace. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a single text from Julian. He wanted to accompany me and to discuss a fair rent agreement. I replied once. Your lease has been terminated due to criminal activity. Direct all further inquiries to my attorney. Then I blocked him. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the moon hang over the Texas hills. Leo was asleep down the hall, safe and cool. The deed was secured. My future was back in my own hands. I hadn't lost a husband that day. I had finally cut out a parasite.